Well, let's just check in on our liberal democracy. What's this? Is criticizing Joe Biden a danger to democracy? As concerns mount over the future of free and fair elections, a debate has broken out about whether the media must protect Biden to save the republic? Ask yourself, would the good guys in a democracy need to ask the question if it's okay to criticize the president? Unsurprisingly, the same hack that wrote this article took a completely different stance when it came to Donald Trump. As I've talked about before, to have an authoritarian regime, you first need institutional support to prop up that authoritarian regime. Donald Trump, nor any Republican, has an institutional support base to prop up an authoritarian regime. All of our American institutions are aligned against Donald Trump and against Republicans, while conversely, the Democrats and the left seem to have total control over all those same institutions.
I'm going to read what Bart Gellman wrote in that cover story for The Atlantic. Some might say this is hyperbolic, but John Hellman, I'm curious if you think it is. The headline is, Trump's next coup has already begun. Trump and his party have convinced a dauntingly large number of Americans that the essential workings of democracy are corrupt, that made-up claims of fraud are true, that only cheating can thwart the victory at their polls, that tyranny has usurped their government, and that violence is a legitimate response. Hyperbolic or fact?
Fact, I think.
I really hate the fact that I have to constantly go over recent history, but the fact is, every single election in my lifetime that Democrats have lost, they claimed was illegitimate or stolen. Whether it be George W. Bush and claims of fraud and hanging chads in a stolen election by the Supreme Court, or when Trump wins and then Democrats and the media begin talking about impeachment before he's even inaugurated, and then when he is inaugurated, there's Democrat riots, and then Democrats, along with their media, disseminate Russian disinformation into the country in an attempt to undo the results of the election. Yet when the other side does it, they claim that it's a tyranny that's trying to usurp the government. This guy also claims that Trump and his supporters think the only way they can win is by cheating, but that's a complete straw man. Nobody's ever suggested that. Or that violence is the only legitimate response. The vast majority of political violence in this country comes from Democrats and the left. I want to know when there's going to be prosecutions against Democrats and their media for inciting a domestic terrorist attack against GOP senators by a Democrat who was screaming, "This is for healthcare." But of course, we know none of that's ever going to happen.
Research that shows that something like at least 8% and maybe as many as 12% of the American people now say that Joe Biden was illegitimate and that violence is an appropriate tool to removing him and restoring Donald Trump. That's somewhere between 20 and 30 million people. That's not hyperbolic at all. Those are all facts.
That's not hyperbolic because I said it's not hyperbolic. This from the very same people who brought us Democracy Dies in Darkness and Holding Power to Account. After the election, I and many others warned that the media was about to become Joe Biden state media immediately. And we were proven right with all the so-called fact checkers doing these interviews and putting out articles insisting that what you were going to see with your own eyes wasn't true. They weren't pro-Biden state media. Oh, no, no, no. But it's just that Joe Biden doesn't lie, so there's nothing to fact check.
You know, if Biden turns out to be the biggest Pinocchio out there, then you'll be back on this program pretty soon telling us.
Be easier if Biden was an equal liar to Trump for me, because then I could go and sort of showily demonstrate, look, you know, I'm independent, I'm treating them the exact same way. The fact is, though, that Biden is not the same, and so the coverage of Biden is going to be equally rigorous, but the final product when we cover Biden is not going to be the same.
One of the most prolific liars in Congress doesn't need fact checkers. So now, after openly admitting that they're coordinating with the White House to sell its policies amid plummeting approval, we're now seeing this push by the media to shell even harder than they already were, justifying it by claiming that if Democrats aren't in power, then democracy has died. Think about just how utterly insane this situation is. We have a media that looks increasingly like it's been compromised by the CCP, and it's bombarding the country with propaganda straight from the White House that says unless Democrats have perpetual power, then America is over.
We've said it before, and we're going to say it again. The biggest story in American politics is and will continue to be this homegrown effort to undermine U.S. democracy, largely fueled by the former president and his loyalists who have hijacked and radicalized a part of the Republican Party. Our two-party system has only one party left that is willing to lose an election. The other appears is willing to win at the cost of breaking things that a democracy cannot live without.
I've said it before. We're facing the most significant test of our democracy since the Civil War. That's not hyperbole.
The urgency that we need to be hearing is, look, there's a crisis. There's the United States, over the course of the last 10 months, is actually a lesson in how democracies stumble and come to the edge. And what are we going to do about this? How are we going to reinvent this system?
24 House Democrats for this story. So what did they say about this?
This is this existential crisis that they're going through. That they are really actually terrified of what the future will be like without her, what it'll be like to try to stay unified and cohesive as they feel like they need to, especially with the political threats and the larger questions of what's going to go on with our democracy and political process here.
The number one national security threat I've ever seen in my life to this country's democracy is the party that I'm in, the Republican Party. It is the number one national security threat to the United States of America. And I'll tell you this, if my party retakes the U.S. House of Representatives in the next cycle, it's going to become a haunted house.
It reveals a discomfort with democracy itself. Because after losing 8 lawsuits on Friday alone, Republicans are enabling an autocratic strain in our politics that sees any election lost by their side as illegitimate.
If I were a betting person right now, I say Trump is going to run again. I mean, he seems to be setting himself up to do that. And if he's not held accountable, then he gets to do it again. I think that could be the end of our democracy. Not to be too pointed about it, but I want people to understand that this is a make or break point. If he were, or someone of his ilk, were once again to be elected president, and if especially he had a Congress that would do his bidding, you will not recognize our country.
Final thing that I would recommend is some sort of urgency index, by which I mean we have to know how far away from the disaster of a collapsed democracy are we?
It's not a coincidence that the Democrat Party and the Democrat Party state media are saying exactly the same thing. Keep us in power or our political opposition will destroy the country because they're inhuman monsters. Isn't it strange that the only way to save democracy is to give Democrats perpetual power with a media that's openly producing propaganda, because if they don't, America and the world would end. That is exactly the purpose of this wildly hyperbolic fear-mongering that I've warned about since the very start of this channel. These people believe that they are saving democracy. These people believe that they're saving the earth. These people deeply believe that their critics and their political opponents are inhuman monsters. Just think about what you could rationalize doing under those circumstances. And also notice how these claims of being anti-democratic are always really vague. They're never specific about what exactly is undemocratic except for opposing the Democratic Party. Is it really that simple? Are they actually trying to argue that being in opposition to the Democratic Party literally means you're opposing democracy? The people that are falling for this most likely won't have the self-awareness to see that they're actually the threat they're talking about. Don't take my word for it either. Listen to this escaped Chinese activist who lived through the Maoist revolution.
In your book, you're describing the directives of Mao Zedong during the Cultural Revolution that would be distributed publicly every night. And then you write, this is your quote, they served a function similar to Donald Trump's late night tweets while in office. So do you see Donald Trump as an authoritarian?
I don't, if you're authoritarian, you have to have a system in supporting you. In United States, with today's condition, you can easily have an authoritarian. In many ways, you're already in the authoritarian state.
How so?
Many things happens today in US can be compared to Cultural Revolution in China.
Like what?
Like people trying to be unified in certain political correctness. That is very dangerous.
All right, folks, that's all I have for this one. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, please hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments.